We're going to be starting using these resources tonight to think about how things are going well at Tier 1. You're not here to beat yourself up for what didn't get done. You're going to take a moment tonight to revisit what your procedures are for teaching. And you're going to think about, how am I doing? What else can I do as I'm continuing to welcome kids back in this first quarter of the school year? And as we enter into this next point of conversation, I want to introduce Wendy Oakes, who is from Arizona State University, a dear friend and colleague, and she is going to take us through the journey of teaching at Tier 1 within a CI3T structure.
Thanks, Kathleen. As Kathleen said, I just wanted to talk a little bit about how you can be using your procedures for teaching during this COVID era, which we are still very much front and center in. And so, hold on just a sec, sorry. Okay. So as you know, you all have, if you are in a CI3T school, you will have an implementation manual. And in that implementation manual, there's an entire section on roles and responsibilities for all stakeholders across academic, behavior, and social skill. And that really provides the clarity and the transparency for your faculty and staff to know exactly what it is that they need to be teaching and reinforcing and monitoring. And so you can see in this first column around academics, most of the school plans will include those low intensity strategies. And it's important that if you include the low intensity strategies, you think about how you're going to teach your teachers to use those effectively. And in just a minute, we're actually going to talk about how families can also be using those at home. But so you're listing them on here, you're providing professional development so teachers can be using those in both virtual and classroom settings. We have learned a ton. Will you do a thumbs up or put in the chat if you have learned at least one new technology tool for instruction over the last year? How many people have learned at least one? How many people have learned 5 or more new tools, right? Yeah, exactly. I'm in that boat as well. So we're really thinking about how we're using these strategies, both in virtual and in-person settings. And we would love in the small groups for you to share those ideas on how those tools can help along with this. As well, we want to really think, Kathleen was talking about, we're bringing some of these students back who have learned whole new skill sets in order to be successful in the environment that they're engaging and learning in, whether it's at home or in a school setting or in a school setting that looks really different than it used to with lots and lots of safety restrictions. So we really want to be continuously teaching. And when students make mistakes in terms of their behavior, we're going to assume that's a learning error, and we're going to continue to teach. So we have this continuum of strategies to use to help redirect, remind, and reteach students. And then also, as Kathleen mentioned, everyone in a CI3T model would have a social skills curriculum at Tier 1. So making sure that you're leveling the playing field for all students. We've heard lots and lots of conversations from families and educators about the limited social experiences that students have had over the last year plus, year and a half plus. And so we want to make sure that we're providing that structure to build that level playing field for how students can be successful in those social emotional interactions and environments. And again, we're doing this at the level of teaching. Anything that we're going to teach, we want to make sure that we're reinforcing it, which Katie will be talking about in just a little bit. And then also we want to know whether what we're doing is effective, and that's our procedures for monitoring, which we will circle back to at the end, and Kathleen will share that. So in your plan, you're going to generate a list of, or you probably already have, a list of activities and opportunities and visuals that you're going to use to make sure that you're teaching these roles and responsibilities and procedures to all of your stakeholders. So these are just a list that was generated by one of our district and some of their the visuals that they are using. But those visuals need to be paired with activities. To put a poster up on your wall and never revisit it again and never use it for anything is not going to be a useful practice. And so we really want to think about what you're doing to make sure that you're promoting the use of these tools, the understanding of the purpose of them and how they work to help you meet your school priorities. So in terms of procedures for teaching for faculty and staff, we're really thinking about that ongoing reteaching and relearning and making sure you're revisiting what's in your manual at all times. And as well, making sure that your faculty and staff have access to your implementation manual, whether it be virtual. Probably everyone has electronic access, and some people I know really like that hard copy. Tammy, I think you're a hard copy, sticky note, your binder kind of, or spiral notebook kind of person. So maybe thinking about both of those things to reach all of the people in your experience. And then if also in your plan, over the last year, you probably have been, or you may want to continue to think about what are some additional ways that you can teach if you're in a virtual setting. So many people are still maybe teaching in person, but holding faculty meetings and all kind of non-essential gatherings of adults still remotely. And so how are you going to be able to use those practices to make sure that you're meeting your expectations? And again, these are included in your expectations or in your CI3T manual. So for example, we would be using, this is our expectation matrix, right? Our Lincoln Lion Pride expectation matrix. And that would be posted in your school as a teaching tool for use for pre-correction, to support your use of behavior specific praise, to remind teachers to be recognizing students for meeting expectations. And also in a virtual context, then what you could do is create this virtual background so that the teachers still have a way to display the expectations for the setting that they're in. So instead of having like a setting poster up on your wall, you actually have it in your virtual background. And there's some templates on the website for doing that. And thank you to David for modeling this for us. And then we also want to think about how we're using these structures to build capacity around putting these new safety practices in place. Most of us are still having kids who are masked. Some of us have kids have a choice of masking or not masking, which creates all kinds of other kinds of dilemmas that we're struggling with and trying to help kids navigate in a successful way. So really still thinking about teaching those expectations. What are they about washing hands and masking and not being able to share other spaces and materials and whatnot. And then also modeling those behaviors. So if we're requiring masks, we are also wearing a mask. Reinforcing them using the system we already have in place. We want to build in efficiencies and predictability for students by making sure we're not completely changing a system that they're familiar with from before COVID, or also what they will return to in our schools. So anytime we have kids either stepping out for remote or kids on extended quarantine, we're keeping that structure really consistent for them because they're already going through a lot of transition and difficult time just having to step in and out of school potentially. We're going to use those low intensity strategies, which we'll talk about again in a minute, and then making sure we're keeping our families engaged and then responding when challenges occur by using the reactive plan that we have in place. And again, this just shows that model. And actually, as I was looking about this, I was thinking that reinforcement kind of comes back, right? We're constantly teaching, modeling, and reinforcing what we want so that we are creating the opportunity for our students to be successful. And then Kathleen was talking about sort of that adapting, right? So we have our expectation matrix. It's in our implementation manual, and that's been agreed upon and built on by all the voices in your faculty and staff. So we want to keep that at the core, but there are times when we might need to add new things, which we never anticipated, but now we're here. So in terms of new practices for safety, you can see that those are highlighted within here. So we're teaching those additional expectations for student, but still the look, the feel, the main expectations remain the same for predictability. And again, this is the hallway. These are the same kinds of expectations we might be adding to that. So we're teaching students some new procedures to be successful currently. And they really want to think about how we use these proactive strategies. So I'm hoping this is part of your conversation in your room, but I was thinking about this in terms of how do we do like active supervision in an online environment? And one of the ways that I've seen be really effective recently is using opportunities to respond as kind of a pair with that so that you're getting a response. You know, kids are with you and engaged, especially if they might have their cameras off. And then when they're in breakout groups, you can actually monitor them by using things like Pear Deck and Google Docs or Jamboard. So you can log in and look at what they're doing to see how the groups are navigating and having conversations. And then you know where to jump in and jump out to best support students. So just thinking about how we supervise them in that virtual environment. Choices are going to continue to be very important. And we have a load of resources on the website around how to use these strategies and how to integrate these practices into your implementation manual. The integrated lesson plan is another resource that we have available for you. And this really helps us tie those three pieces together because we really need efficiencies. We don't have time to separately teach social skills, put those aside. Now we're going to do academic instruction. The whole purpose of teaching the social skills is so that kids can interact with each other effectively. So we might build an academic lesson plan and then think about what are the social skills and behavioral expectations that are going to help students be successful in this context and helpful in navigating this academic activity. Or we might have our academic objective written and then say, you know what, here's a social skill I think we really need some practice on. How might I create an activity for learning this academic content that requires students to use this social skill? And so you can work in any direction you want in terms of what you're trying to teach. But to be mindful of all of them in the same lesson. And then to go through and say, what are the engagement strategies, these low intensity strategies that might be the most effective to help me achieve this goal, and offer opportunities for students to really fully maximize their engagement and their motivation and minimize disruptions to the activities, especially as we're returning to school and kids are not used to being in school for very long periods of time or having more free time to be able to navigate home and during the day. So really need to be supporting them in positive ways. This lesson plan offers an opportunity for reflection, which could be really useful during your PLC as you're trying to promote the use of low intensity strategies and instruction in an integrated way. These are the resources that are available at home for families, and we have many of these resources in both Spanish and in English. And so we would encourage you. One thing I've heard a lot from parents is what an eye opener for them to hear their kids' instruction in a virtual environment. And so we've opened up a whole new world to families. And so maybe sharing some of the things that we use that are effective for them to use at home, they might appreciate in a new way, and we might think about offering them in a new way. So all of these low intensity strategies can be applicable at home. And then there's this graphic, if you want to share the graphic, that can open up the conversation about what might be effective. We have lots, as you know, I think most of you are probably familiar with our website. We have lots and lots of professional learning resources that are available to you to use now, to download and adapt and edit in a way that feels appropriate for you. So there's PowerPoints and implementation checklists and ways to monitor student feedback, teacher feedback, and also the actual effectiveness of these interventions for your students. And of course, as Kathleen said, we continue to invite you and to invite anyone you would like to come to these Empower sessions, especially if you're in the building process. It opens up opportunities for them to get a sense of what CI3T is about, kind of demystifying that and
Wendy,
some new practices.
And if I could add, I'm sorry for interrupting you.
Please do.
One thing that for people that are in a building year, when Wendy and I used to do this large scale across an entire state, we would regularly encourage people that when they were in the building process to bring faculty and staff that were interested parties that are not part of the team to these sessions along with team members, because it's a way to drip information about what's coming down the following year. Because when people are in a building year, you're not changing any practices in your building, you're coordinating everything. So when I'm looking at like Susan and Sandy and others, this could be a really nice place to bring people to this type of a thing, because it allows people outside of the team to learn a little bit more. And it's an opportunity for people that are leading those training efforts as trainers, as coaches, and as CI3T leadership team members to hear things again. So I think that point that Wendy made is a really, really good one.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for bringing that up. And I think too, like some of these things feel very familiar to teachers. Some of the names might be different, but for teachers to come to a session to learn about a strategy and to be like, oh, I use that in my classroom, but I didn't know it was called this. This is great. I need to bring that back. Then when you're starting to bring in those new practices and they're looking at those iterations of your plan over time, they're starting to make some connections with what they're seeing there, and it feels a little more connected to their current practice. So thank you for bringing that up. I agree. So we're going to go into this first talk block, and we're going to have 15 minutes to have a conversation about different procedures for teaching, what to expect across multiple kind of learning contexts, or as students are transitioning in and out, or we're using all the new tech tools and information that we have learned over the last year and a half. So I think we're going to go into breakout groups.
I really appreciate the richness of the conversation. Some people were, very astute and thinking about, sometimes implementation wanes, like when you have new principal leaders or new district leaders. And so one of the things I wanted to share with you before Katie gets started is one of the nice things we're working on right now as part of another project, Project Enhance, is we're actually making these additional on-demand resources that are all dedicated to leadership. Like, how do you onboard people into your building? How do you share about CI3T in your hiring process? How do you onboard people to make sure they know their roles and responsibilities? Because like many of you were talking about in your breakout rooms, there's so many successes. Like, I love what Sarah put in the chat and the conversations about what's going well. And Angela, thank you for sharing what you were seeing. Just great conversations. And it's not a one-time thing for implementation. So all these practices that you guys have been doing, some of you for years, some of you just getting started, it is the art and the science of when to put, teaching moments in place, and not just with kids, but with faculty and staff, and then making sure to recognize the faculty and staff for engaging in this process, for using data, for teaching those social and emotional well-being lessons, for weaving them into instruction. And I'm excited for Katie Austin to present tonight, because she's going to talk to you broadly about the idea of reinforcement. And as you listen to her tonight, listen to her messaging about it's not just reinforcing for the kids. Like, you also want to make sure that we're being very intentional in acknowledging the fine work of the adults in your building. And I do want to say, as like Wendy and I have been doing this for a number of years, and Mark's entering, I think, like his 6th or 7th year and doing this in some capacity, it can feel exhausting at times. So it's very important to take moments to pause and praise, like recognize the people that are contributing, and it's like taking the times, like even in terms of your own fitness goals, to recognize the good things you're doing, like water counts on good, I'm walking well, maybe I didn't hit the gym as many times as I want, but remember to look around and look for the good things as well. So Katie, thanks so much for sharing with us about procedures for reinforcing tonight.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. And that's a great segue to what I'm going to talk about today. So after we have our procedures for teaching, and after we've established these procedures with our faculty and staff, students, parents, and community members, we want to ensure that we continue to see the behaviors we desire that help make our community function so well together. So that's where our procedures for reinforcing come in. We reinforce the behaviors we desire so we can see more and more of those behaviors that help our students be successful. And that's the point of this section of our primary plan. So I wanted to share something from one of our district partners. Kathleen was just mentioning this, and I think it's really important. Typically when we think about reinforcing, we think about students, right? I think that's just kind of where we go as educators. But we do know, especially during this time, that teachers, other faculty and staff, more broadly, your custodian, maybe people who are working in your lunch line, they all are deserving now more than ever of reinforcement, right? And so it's such an important time for simple acknowledgements. And one of our district partners has shared some of the things that they've done in order to really reinforce their faculty and staff. And there's a virtual postcard that we actually have on our website that I'll take us to in a minute and show you, that you can download. And it's just a really easy way to send a thank you, even just for meeting the expectation, like, thanks for coming to work today. I know it's tough because right now it is. And that can be really just something small and easy for you to do, but can make a really big difference for one of your colleagues. And just not like limiting it to postcards now. I think that's really helpful to do, especially when we had that pretty much, solid virtual environment. But now that a lot of us are back, we can still do this in safe ways of like dropping a sticky note on someone's desk when they're not there. Just little things that you can think of, I think, go a long way.
One of the
maybe,
things that,
yeah,
before you go on, I just wanted
yeah.
to follow up on that. One of the things that I saw that was so nice from both principal leaders and teachers is that they set these expectations like in faculty meetings, like to Katie's point, about building routines and about how to do those acknowledgements. And one of the principals we used to work with, she had this routine where she had a certain number of tickets and then she would fill them out for the adults and she would actually leave them like on the outside of like the entryway to that teacher's classroom. So it was the same ticket that was going to the kids, but it was an acknowledgement for the adults. And then she modeled that, you know, I'm going to give out like 10 of these over the course of a day, thinner rate for adults. But then they did the same type of thing that was that same type of acknowledgement, but using that same currency was a way to program for generalization because it was also a cue for the kid to see, wow, my teacher did a good job today on something. So sets a nice tone. Thanks for letting me jump in, Katie.
Yeah, absolutely. Love that. Thank you for sharing that. So you guys might be searching for some ideas for reinforcing students without using paper to exchange between yourselves for safety reasons, or maybe because when, like Wendy was sharing earlier, we've all learned a lot about working in a digital environment and the efficiencies that can create. And so even if you are in person and you move to a more digital reinforcement system, we just wanted to remind you that we do have some really excellent resources on our COVID page for that. And I wanted to bring that up and show you guys. So when you go to ci3t.org, you can type in /COVID, or you can click the button. You choose, it's up to you. And then you can scroll down here, and usually these are collapsed, these accordions. When I uncollapse the resources for educators, there's a couple of different things I want to bring your attention to. We have some tips here for providing reinforcement in virtual settings. So an infographic that just gives some ideas, maybe if you're doing this still virtually, or even just ways to keep reinforcement in a virtual digital platform. And there's also a voice thread to give you a little bit more information on that, especially if you want to hear Mark's voice, it'll be there and it's excellent. And then as you scroll down a little bit lower, we might find this digital reinforcement tracker templates and tutorials. Again, all of this has been created and really is the brainchild of Mark Buckman, and it's really excellent. I was a third grade teacher for many years and worked in many different types of digital parent communication and digital reinforcement structures. And I do think this one is really simple to follow and also very useful. So definitely check it out. And if you guys have questions, especially in this coming breakout room, your coaches would be more than willing to direct you to this and walk you through it to the best of their ability at that time. So regardless of what digital or paper platform you're using to provide students with acknowledgements, it's an integral part of your procedures for reinforcing needs to be that every adult in your building has access to the same system and can give acknowledgements at the same rate to students, as that's what the research tells us. It's important for students to be able to see that each adult in the building can provide them with acknowledgement. In my first breakout room, I got to be with Thomasina, who's on the call, and she was sharing a lot of interesting things about what she's done as an administrator at the beginning of the year to support both her teachers and her students in the school building. And I think one of the most important things that she's done is really modeled, this is what this lesson is going to be about, but modeled, these are the procedures to really help students and staff understand what's expected for the year. And then likewise, to take that even further, I'm sure that she'll also be doing those same things for reinforcement, modeling by reinforcing her staff, modeling by reinforcing her students. And I'm looking forward to hearing about that as well. So during this critical time at the beginning of the school year and throughout the school year, there are specific tenets we want to use when it comes to reinforcing desired student behavior. So we want to make sure that regardless of what kind of reinforcement we're doing, digital or paper, when we are giving a ticket for positive behavior, we always pair that with behavior-specific praise. So we want to make sure students know exactly what it is that they did well. Same thing with adults. We want to make sure adults know exactly what it is they did well. So like this example says on number 1, Lori, thank you for walking down the hallway with a quiet voice and your hands at your side. For showing responsibility, you've earned a pause ticket. So here, this faculty staff member has given the student behavior-specific praise about walking down the hallway quietly. And then they've even connected it to their school-wide expectations. And like Wendy mentioned to us earlier, just having those expectation matrices up and not using them as a teaching tool doesn't really help us as much as if we're interacting with them daily and often. And so this is another example of how to do that. And like number 2 is telling us, in the first days and weeks of implementing a positive behavior interventions and support system. So in those first few weeks of school, like we're in right now, it's so important to really give students opportunities to receive tickets and to give students tickets when they're when they're giving us the desired behaviors that we're hoping to see, so that it becomes part of the routine and we continue to see more and more and more of those behaviors. And then over time, we can fade the tickets and provide intermittent reinforcement, which just means like not every single time, but we're continually giving that behavior specific praise, because that also then becomes reinforcing to our students. We want to make sure that school staff are also really consistent when they're giving out tickets and distributing reinforcement. And so you can even use maybe portions of staff meetings to talk about how you might be distributing tickets that week. Or maybe there's a weekly email that you send out to your staff members and you talk about, this week, let's concentrate on giving behavior specific praise and tickets when we're in the hallway. Wendy also mentioned this, but it's just furthering supporting students when there's consistency across the building with adults and reinforcement. Especially like Wendy was saying, if students or faculty members are out for a good portion of time, the system can still continue and flourish if it's consistent from all adults in the building. We also want to make sure that students feel like they have a voice in this reinforcement structure that we have. So surveying your students, and these can be students as young as 5 or as old as 18, in informal or formal ways, surveying your students to gain understanding of what reinforcements might you desire, what would be exciting to you to see. And then of course, like we do with everything, because we're excellent teachers, we want to make sure that we explicitly teach students how tickets can be earned and what tickets can be used for once they're received. So after we survey the students, like we were talking about in the last slide, you might even want to create a board that students can reference, kind of like they get to reference their expectation matrix. Maybe they also get to reference this reinforcement menu that they came up with as a class or as a school. So they can look and see what could I exchange my tickets for today? And some of the virtual ideas here could be used, I think, yes, obviously virtually, but also in the classroom. And I think now you might even just have a wider range of things you can choose from for students to pick the reinforcer of their choosing. And finally, this is really just a further illustration of what I took you to on the website, thinking about what we can do to set up a Google structure if you would be interested in. And again, our coaches can talk to you about that when we get into our breakout rooms. You can take a look at this infographic about providing reinforcement, whether it's virtually or in person. I think this would be useful for you. And then just a final reminder, that ticket on the top is really just to remind you that regardless of what kind of structure, whether it's digital or paper that you're using to reinforce students, making sure that every adult has access to do this and feels empowered to support students in this way, so that all students know that all adults can give them acknowledgements at all times. So before we go into this next breakout room, and I apologize if it starts ticking down after 15, but your 15 minutes will not start until we leave, I promise. But we're going to talk about how things are going in your school building with respect to reinforcing faculty and staff for implementing your CI3T plan. So I encourage you, if you are implementing right now, to pull up your manual. And I know Kathleen mentioned that at the beginning, but pull that manual up and really look at it and think about, what are the ways that we've been really successful so far this school year in reinforcement, and where are some places that we can grow? And that kind of goes into that next question as well. How are we doing with procedures for reinforcing students and parents and community members? And also thinking about that first question about our colleagues' efforts as well. Really think about each of those groups of people, groups of stakeholders in your school that make up your school community, and how we are seeing that they're being reinforced during this time. And then thinking about, just like we did in the last breakout room, it's so important to think about who we have in the building who is really excellent at certain things. So if there's a teacher or a staff or faculty member that's really excellent with procedures for reinforcing, and their students seem to really respond to the way in which they execute that every day, like lean on that person. It's so important to do that. And then likewise, who might need a little bit more support so we can make sure our students are successful.
I really appreciate people tackling the, the joy and the pain of reinforcement. And by that, I mean, some people come to this idea of reinforcement with some impressions that it's not healthy for kids. And so it's going to be really important for us in the building and an implementing phase to make sure that people get that specific training on the hows and the why for the value of behavior specific praise. And I heard lots of great conversation in two of the breakout rooms I went to. They were talking about making sure that the menu of reinforcers is really diverse for things that kids want to either get or things that kids want to avoid. And in our project, we refer to it as like a function-based reinforcement menu. So, because some kids are going to want to get, and some kids are going to want to avoid attention. Some kids are going to want to get activities. Some kids are going to want to avoid those very same activities. Some kids are going to get, tangibles, things to pay with, and other kids may not like that. And then same was true for sensory experiences. There are going to be some kids, the hummers, the tappers, that enjoy listening to music with headphones, and there's other kids that just want the noise canceling headphones. So making sure that a reinforcement structure is well designed is key. Because sometimes we have heard through the years where people will say things like, this ticket system doesn't work with fifth grade. It works with all the other kids. That just to me tells me that we've got work to do to develop that reinforcement structure for things that they either want to access or avoid. And who better than to help with this than the kids themselves? So in the building process that some of you are going through, like some of the Washington schools that are here today, there's actually a whole section where we learn from kids that are members of their CI3T leadership team. The kids work together in one of the scripted lessons to give input on things that, and from their view, that kids like to get or avoid. And through this whole work on reinforcement, we need to be well prepared to explain the hows and whys of behavior. And some of the work that we're getting to do as part of Project Enhance is making these little on-demand modules, like little tiny ebooks, little PowerPoints, little voiceovers to explain things like what's the difference between reinforcement and bribery. Bribery is when you're trying to get somebody to do something that's not in their best interest, drink it, smoke it, steal it. Reinforcement is you see certain behaviors you want to see more of that's in the kid's best interest. And also making sure we're not doing things like really effusive praise, like saying to a child that you are the best, you're the most brilliant fifth grade kid I've ever had. That actually creates a lot of pressure for a child. That's not shaping the desired behavior. We want to shape behaviors that are malleable. So great conversations. When you come back, we're going to take a short break right now, give you a chance to feed and water yourself. And when you come back, we are going to think about what the conversations you just had on teaching and reinforcing. And now we're going to shift into the data piece. Like, how do I actually use data now to make decisions at tier 1, at tier 2, and tier 3? So we're going to have a snippet of that conversation. And I also want to say that not this session, but the next session, the whole session is devoted to shaping behavior, like managing challenging behaviors. And I think it's going to be really nice conversations to build off the fine work that you've already done tonight. So if you would go take a true 5-minute break, and we will be back right here to talk about procedures for monitoring. And as you come back, when you do, please open up your chat if you would, and tell us one type of reinforcer that you use either with students or with kids, something that they could either get or something that they can avoid. So enjoy your break, and we'll see you in just a couple minutes. I look forward to seeing what you put in the chat. I've seen people use their clips afterwards to say, like, if you draw a kid's name out of a jar in your classroom, like a ticket, then you can say, grab your ticket. I'm going to grab 5 people's tickets, and then grab your clip, and you can go clip on whatever center you want to start with. So then they clip it on a wheel, like a center wheel. So it's a new way to use clips. So no longer anything negative. Haley, that's a great set of ones, either lunch or game time with a teacher. One of my favorite stories about kids and reinforcers was we were driving out to this really rural school, was a middle school. And we ran into the kids' bathroom because I needed to go very badly before we started our meeting. And there was a girl primping in the bathroom. And I'm like, oh, what are you getting ready for something special? And she's like, well, this week I won a spot in our CI3T video. I'm like, oh, what does that mean? And she's like, well, do you know about that? And I'm like, well, no. I said, tell me what it is. And she's like, Well, my name got drawn, so I'm winning a spot. So I'm going to be like the guest star this week. And every week they did these little recordings, and then they did at the very beginning when the bell rang at this middle school. So as soon as the bell rang, they showed these teaching expectations lessons that were taught by kids for kids, and they were hilarious. Like some of them were like inappropriate clothing for what should and shouldn't be worn. There was one on public display of affection, and they got the teachers to act out everything you weren't allowed to do in school, and then the kids acted out everything that was allowable. So they had this great bank of libraries, and I was listening to Thomasina talk about her bank, but that's what it made me think of. So anyway, great ideas.
Well,
and
can I share just a quick one too? Do you mind?
absolutely.
And I was looking at Tammy's in the chat. If you haven't seen Tammy's,
So
about
sweet. Yeah.
Students donating items to the Humane Society, and Tammy, you might want to share more about that. But we had a middle school that we worked with, and they had the most impressive school store I could even imagine. But one of the things that happened is they would have donations and all kinds of different things, but sometimes it was things that they wouldn't think that kids would choose. But what they found is that kids were coming in to shop for their parents for like Mother's Day or Father's Day. They were coming in to use their tickets to buy a birthday gift so they could take a birthday gift to a party that they were attending for a friend. So it really, so I think even beyond what kids are trying to access or avoid for themselves is really thinking about what it is that might motivate them or create an opportunity, and even sort of like issues around access and equity as well. So thank you,
Good
Tammy,
point.
for reminding me. And I don't know if Tammy.
Yeah, that's great. And same along that same vein, it doesn't always have to be for themselves. We've seen, as Tammy mentioned, like donations to Humane Society. Some schools have it set up where you can use your tickets to buy food items, not non-perishable food items for families in need in their school community. They don't know who the child is, but like they can get a box of mac and cheese and things with X number of tickets, and then there's a delivery to the families. And one of the districts that we watched one time, they pre-printed out these certificates that said CI3T supporter. They chartered a school bus, they went to the mall, and it was right before the end of the year when they did inventory on things. And they just got this group of kids that were on their CI3T team, and they just went divided up and did the bottom and the top floor of the mall. And they came out with anything that they wanted to give, anything that was donated. And they used to do these monthly assemblies where the first month you needed no tickets to get in. You just went in so you could see what the experience was like. And then it was the next month you needed 2 tickets. The next month was 3. So they kept upping the antes. But when the kids walked in, there'd be like basketball going, there'd be music playing, there'd be a quiet room for board games. And there was this giant table, just mounds of stuff that they had got through these donations. And I remember looking at this table thinking, nobody's going to pick some of this stuff. But to Wendy's point, this kid, the first thing he goes over and picks is a roller bag. And apparently it had been returned and they couldn't resell it. And so I had to ask, I'm like, congratulations on winning, but like, can I ask why you picked that? He's like, my mom travels a lot and her birthday's coming up and I wanted to do something nice for her. But it was just a really great reminder that's what's reinforcing for one is not necessarily reinforcing for all. And please remember that. So welcome the contributions. The only advice I have to keep in mind is don't ever give something that requires a purchase with it, like a ticket for free fries with the purchase of a burger, because not every family can afford the purchase of the burger. So keeping an eye towards that. So
can I share one more and then I'll be quiet?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm sorry. Educators are so creative. So we were in an elementary school one time and they were trying to select library helpers. So they had so many students that wanted to do it. What they did was they allowed students to use their tickets. It was like 2 or 3 tickets or whatever, but to put their application in. So just to apply to have this really prestigious thing, they were willing to use it for that. So anyway, okay, I'll be quiet, but just lots of really creative ways.
Just so good things. And in that spirit, I think Howard has to share the Sunflower 500 story.
Well, one of our, actually, I suggested this. We had an office drawing every week for prizes that kids could win. And I think I put in the chat that time I left, our parents were our biggest providers of rewards for kids. But I suggested we had a circular hallway, and I suggested one of the prizes be they get to run in a Sunflower 500, which was they get to, well, we picked up 4 or 5 kids and they got to run around that hallway just as fast as they can. And all of the classes came out to their doors and cheered the kids on. And it was super exciting. And the first year I suggested, my teachers just had a fit. There was no way that we were going to do that because it was just reinforcing an inappropriate behavior. But by the time I left, that was the highlight of every week. It was a great way to kick off Friday mornings because we finished our drawing. And then the last thing we did each Friday after the first announcements was run that 500. And we had kids, I can remember, who started with us in kindergarten. And by the time they were 5th grade, some of them, that's the only thing they ever wanted to put in tickets for was to run that 500. And it was so encouraging because it was an opportunity for even kids who didn't get a lot of recognition for other stuff to have the whole building cheering them on as they ran around that
Yeah.
place. Was
And
fun.
I think it's such a great thing. And like you tapped into something important there. And I think it also is important to note that costs nothing. So when people push back on reinforcing kids is too expensive, it's not. And I'm so excited for the next time when we're together, when we're talking about shaping behavior, we're going to enjoy some conversation points like this to really learn from each other and share. And we want to give a lot of this attention to teaching and practicing, and not just these expectations for PBS, but also bringing in that social and emotional well-being component so that when we see kids using those skills, like in instruction and other places, we're going to do those same type of acknowledgments. I'm excited for what's next. Another thing that I want to emphasize is that as we think about the good work you're doing at Tier 1, there is no need to be perfect. And I love the people that shared. And I know some people are also sharing like, this is not happening. Like we say we're doing it, but we're not necessarily. And so I urge people to be patient with that. And it may be time to restart, and it could be time to reinvigorate. So it might be reassembling your CI3T leadership team. And if you have onboarded in your building a new principal or new teachers, I know Tammy Becker had just did a fabulous job of welcoming new like educators into her building and really being intentional about the time to teach it. And one thing we don't want to do is make anybody feel like uncomfortable to be able to say, like, I'm really not totally sure what this CI3T set of initials is. Can somebody help me get started? So we are excited to put resources in front of you like this session and other things to help you with that. And this next part where most of you are right now in the school year is this, we're getting ready to get some information in your buildings, not just from a research perspective, but from a life perspective. Most of you are getting ready to start doing some data collection on procedures for monitoring. So in your buildings right now, as part of your CI3T implementation plan, you have an assessment schedule, and it specifies not just the data that you collect on kids, but it also collects the information that you are going to get right now in your buildings if you're an implementer in fall and spring from adults. And so really, this could be a perfect time for you to get these data, hear from people, and then use these data to shape the professional learning that you're going to do right now. So normally in a CI3T school in fall and in winter, teachers are committed, and not just teachers, but all classified and certified staff. There's an opportunity in fall and spring to give input first on social validity, to find out what they think about the goals and the procedures and how well it's working in the building. And this is done with a tool called the Primary Intervention Rating Scale. And it's very short. It's like 17 items, and there's spaces for open-ended where you can read themes back from people. And at the same time, teachers will also tell you in a self-report situation, here's the big things that I'm teaching right now, procedures for teaching, here's how I'm doing reinforcement, here's how I'm using my data. And I know like Mark Buckman right now, he and I spent some time today, and we'll finalize this early next week to share out with people the reminder about how to do the training to do the direct observations for fidelity. And I have to just brag on Stacy Kramer because we were in a district meeting, and I just love that was one of the first questions is like, all right, how are we going to get this done? How are we going to, we're ready to start our direct observations. The value is being able to like take peeks into classrooms. So in addition to the self-report to say, here's what I saw in fall and here's what I saw in spring, there's also tools available to you where you can go in and do direct observation. And on this call, there's many different partners that are all trained to criterion to go walk into classrooms and see what evidence of CI3T is happening in terms of what's being taught, what's being reinforced. And ahead of time, you're going to want to make sure that people are prepared to know what they're looking for. So it's not just walking in, they need to know what they're looking for. So what Mark and I were starting to work on today was some revisions of the training procedures to get your team ready to go do those observations. And in a CI3T model, it's an outside observer, like somebody that like could be a coach from your school, or it could be somebody from another school. Some schools do it with like these people swap and they go look in each other's buildings and they get glimpses of what it looks like. But the way it works is like you basically knock on the door, the teacher opens it. And I know in the years when Wendy and I would do these, there's some days somebody opens a door and their bangs are blown back and they're thinking about a career in Starbucks. That's okay. You can say, I'll come back later. But if they invite you in, you walk in, you listen for 30 minutes, you watch, you fill out what you saw, then you hand an iPad or a piece of paper and say, what did you see in that 30 minutes? And it's not a gotcha, it's a coaching opportunity. So in fall, in spring, this information is gleaned to find out what people think about what's happening and actually what is happening in the place. And at the same time, there's also attention to making sure that the tiered fidelity inventory is also being collected so that you get these rich sources, multiple sources of information to see what's happening at tier 1. It's not to go berate anybody. It's a place where you can take a pause. So in one of the breakout rooms, and I don't want to call the person out because I don't want them to feel uncomfortable with it, but this person was sharing that, man, this is just not happening the way it used to. And so what do I do? So one of the things you can do, all of us can do, is after these data are collected and shared back, we're going to use these in a supportive way to reset. So if you find that people are saying, you know, these procedures aren't happening, expectations aren't posted, nobody's teaching the social and emotional well-being, that's an opportunity as a leader to think about what supports do they need and to coach them up to be able to do that. And at the same time, you're going to do that, as I mentioned, in fall and spring. At the same time, you're going to be getting ready to launch your screenings to find out how kids are doing in terms of their behavior in your building. And I'd like you to think of like internalizing and externalizing behavior patterns. Those are like behavioral markers for how well-being is going in terms of your building. So those are how you're going to be doing those social and emotional well-being checks. So that's fall, winter, and spring. And remember, when you did your academic screenings, those happened as soon as kids came back to the building. With behavior screenings, you wait 4 to 6 weeks, and those get completed 3 times a year. And when we come back next time, we're going to show you data from different schools, and we're going to show you how that information can be used to actually shape how you both prevent and respond to challenging behaviors from happening. So in your monitoring plan, the short story right now is data are not boring. Data are important. And one of the main distinctions between traditional multi-tiered systems of support and CI3T, which is a broadening of traditional MTSS, is that these data get collected from teachers, from students, like student performance, and they're used together to shape professional learning. And so it is not a canned set of things that you need to put in front of your faculty and staff every single month or every single fall. You're going to learn from them what they need. So it's like individualized professional learning based on where people are. So that is important as you're onboarding new people. And you can have in a building, like I was talking to one of our district partners, she's been a principal leader for 6 years in a building. And she's like, I've got everybody at different stages. She's like, I've been doing this for 7 years, but I've got some first year implementers as first year teachers. I've got, you know, some people that have been doing it 2, 3, 4, 5. So you can think about all these resources that you're interacting with as like a spiral curriculum. And then when you think about the systematic screening piece of it that's getting ready to come up, I want to remind you about this page on our website, and it's called Systematic Screening. And on that page, you will see that there's some short videos and there's different versions. And I believe, and David, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there's like a 3-minute version and that's 25-minute version. You probably have a lot of new people that are in your building right now that might be getting ready to screen for the first time, and probably lots of questions about screening in the COVID era. Like questions like, Is it reliable? Is it valid? And we're engaged in partnerships right now as part of another project called Project Screen. And we're in our final stages of data collection from a couple districts. And they have been such amazing partners in pulling information. And very soon we will be able to do some predictive validity analyses to share with you about how one screening tool, a free access tool, the systematic screening, or SRSS, student risk screening scale for internalizing and externalizing, how that's faring in the COVID era. But we do have immediate guidance on that page, and you might consider sharing, this infographic with your building leaders or your site leaders. But you're going to do exactly what you're doing right now. You're going to engage in professional learning, make sure you're using multiple sources of data to shape the instruction, and we want to screen responsibly. Some people in the past have said perhaps we should not screen until we know how these tools are functioning in the COVID era. And I would respectfully suggest we already had many, many years in the field of education of knowing what happens when we don't do systematic screening. When we don't do systematic screening, we know that we have an inordinate number of kids, usually boys and usually kids of color, that wind up getting exclusionary practices like office discipline referrals and suspensions. We know that these screening data historically have predicted course failures. They predict lower grade point averages. They predict, some really unfavorable outcomes. But until there are screening data, my suggestion is that you do continue to screen, but you screen responsibly. And I was loving this meeting I was in the other day, and somebody wrote back in the chat and they said, well, I'm uncomfortable with screening because I don't want one data point to decide what happens for a kid for intervention. And the good news is it doesn't. The screening data are one source of information. So I want you to know these resources are here, along with some information on other screening tools that are available. So as you are thinking about this point in time in the school year, and I'm looking at this calendar over here, and I'm loving the fact that my daughter turns 22 next week. And very soon your screening windows are going to open up, and you're going to be finding out what's happening in classrooms, and you're going to see what's going well. You're going to see some targets for improvement. And when you get your fall screening data for your kids, you're going to be able to look to see, where do I need to intervene? Is this a tier 1 issue? And I love the fact, especially for those of you already implementing, like if you get your data back on systematic screening and you find that you've got like 30% of your kids having higher than average internalizing issues, then you know what to do. You're going to intervene at tier 1. You're going to pull in more lessons from that validated resource and address issues of anxious feelings and things that you can do for good overall health, sleeping and nutrition. You're going to tackle that at tier 1. You're also going to have an opportunity right now to start thinking, when you get your data sources in, is it time to start connecting kids to additional resources, like in terms of additional supports in your building? And in a CI3T model, I want to be really clear. Tier 2 is not GITE. Tier 2 is not like a pre-referral intervention process. And tier 3 is not special education. When we think about tier 2 supports, you are thinking about complementing the work that's already being done at tier 1 with additional validated strategies, practices, and programs. And I think about it like this, and I know several of you have heard me talk about, CrossFit for years. My daughter is a competitive CrossFitter, and she can do amazing things in this gym. And I don't think I'm ever going to forget my very first CrossFit workout when I went in with her to this gym. In that gym, while she's on, the rig doing pull-ups and chest to bars, that guy brought over a giant rubber band for me to step into and pull, and still nothing happened. My chin was not over the bar. So he brings back a second giant rubber band, and all of a sudden it's like a holiday miracle. My chin is over the bar. He gave me support, literally a support to get my chin over the bar. And where Katie can be on that wall doing deficit handstand push-ups, he let me lay on top of a box to approximate it. In a CI3T model, we want to not think that every tier 2 support needs to be a go to a table type of thing, like go to a small group. Some of it will be like social skills groups. Absolutely, definitely. But some of these supports are going to be things like one of the conversations that was just being had in a breakout room. Some kids are going to need a much higher rate of reinforcement to stay in that classroom and to feel welcome and to feel valued there. Some kids are going to need things like choices, like, here, these are two options for what we're going to do next. And I'm just going to come back in a second and I'll grab whichever one you don't want to start with. Because we know that even just offering very small instructional choices, even the choice of what do you feel like doing first, that is oftentimes enough to increase engagement and minimize disruption. And some things might even just be simply self-monitoring. When I look at a CrossFit workout, I love the fact that they have you log what weight you did. Like I know Mark is a runner and he does, exercise things as well. But I know he's tracking data on how his performance is going. We want to teach kids that everything's malleable, how fast you read, your oral reading fluency right now. We want to graph that for them. We want to show them the good things that happens when they're regular attenders. We want them to access naturally occurring reinforcement. So when we move throughout this series this year, we're going to spend additional time talking about tier 2 supports, and we're going to talk about what to do when kids have really intensive intervention needs, like tier 3 needs for behavior, like functional assessment-based interventions. We want to make sure that each kid gets what they need at the right time. And so part of the work that we do in CI3T is, if we are committed to closing gaps in performance with kids, which I think all of us are really concerned about learning loss right now, and it's differential for different groups. As we think about understanding where those gaps in learning are, one of the things we have to do is reduce the gaps in access. And so part of how we're going to reduce the gaps in access is literally look 3 times a year to see how kids are doing, and also to make sure that we're checking to see how teachers are doing, because we cannot continue to overwhelm teachers. So that's why the blueprint that you have, rather than grabbing a new bullying prevention program, another resource, do what you have first with Fidelity. And so that's where we're going to start. As we wrap up in our final moments, as we look ahead to this calendar year that's in front of us, we are, hard to believe, already at the end of September, and we are now heading into fall. As you're looking ahead, I loved the fact that the coaches that were in your room, and how great that we had such talented coaches here tonight. And I appreciate people that have come at the end of very long days to be here. I'd like you to know that the resources we've shared to you tonight, I saw some coaches actually opening up and connecting to things like this, like on the COVID tab. If you've got families that are supporting kids that are home on quarantine, or some that have decided to stay remote for the years, and I know it's different in different states, I wanted to again make you aware of these resources for families, where we're taking some of these same strategies, practices, and programs and adapting them for use with families. Like if you've got families that are setting up expectations for how they're going to manage scheduling at home and learning some of these low intensity strategies from a parent perspective, you can share those resources with them. And we also encourage you to bring family members with you if you'd like to these Empower sessions. They're absolutely open to the community. And we have worked with some district leaders in the past who even did little mini Project Empowers with family members, like at school site council meetings, et cetera. And I worked with one year with a district where they actually just set up this opportunities for families where each of these topics, they did a parent version. So it was like a CI3T night, kind of like a coffee talk thing. So know that those resources are there. And these are on the COVID tab. And you also have in-person ones on the professional learning tab. When we look ahead for this next year, the next session is going to be on November 10th, and the entire topic is on very practical strategies for supporting the students' use of positive behaviors at school and at home. So there's going to be a nice family component. So if you do want to invite people from your parent-teacher organization or other parent leaders that are in your building or your district, please feel free to do that. And we're going to get a little bit more into the weeds about how do you actually teach expectations in a building. We're going to hit a little harder on the acknowledgement systems. And this is usually pretty popular, we're going to talk about what to do when the wheels fall off the bus. Because even with all these great positive, proactive things in place, there are absolutely going to be some kids that need more than Tier 1 has to offer. And there's definitely going to be kids that have acting out issues. The next 3 sessions are going to be about systematic screening, an entire session on managing acting out behavior. And then lastly, we're going to end the year with supporting people that are feeling anxious, specifically our kids. And in that session, we'll be talking again about family and teacher components. So feel free to register. And also, if you are interested in just casual conversations, it is a PowerPoint free zone. So there are no PowerPoints here. So you can come to any of these. Grant Allen coordinates these, and these are also on the professional learning tab. But this is a place to drop in and ask questions, and it's a place to connect. Thank you, Grant, for putting that in the chat. It's a place to connect with other implementers so that you can hear about what it looks like in different places. Oftentimes people will say, can you give me the name of a middle school or a high school or an elementary school, or can I talk to a district leader who's working with you in your research partnership? And we must respectfully say no because of confidentiality agreements, but we can reach out to them. And if they want to meet you, it's kind of like professional learning matching on the backside, or you can just show up at these. But these will be another place to help you with implementation. So as we close out today, just thank you most sincerely for the huge lift that you're doing as educators. I know it is complicated, and I want to remind you that your well-being is just as important as the students' well-being. And I'm thankful for the learning opportunities we've had thus far. I'm eager to replicate this study at some point, but pre-COVID, we did learn that when about 2 years into implementation, we've learned that teachers implementing in schools, elementary, middle, and high, tended to have lower rates of burnout than the national average when they were hovering right about 75% implementation. And they even had a stronger sense of self-efficacy in some components of their teaching. So good for kids, good for teachers, greatly appreciate it. And if everybody would give me a huge shout out to Wendy Oakes and Katie Austin for presenting tonight, much, much appreciated. So thank you guys very much. Be safe, be good to each other. We hope you'll come back.